Welcome to the care of the electronic Mercedes Benz. Our MBCA technical director, George Murphy, who's part of the Smoky Mountains section, is going to be presenting for us, and it will be moderated by Gary Edwards here. So this is going to be our agenda for today. Gary's already done his welcome. I'm going to go over some of the Zoom controls, and then George is going to talk about his presentation. And then at the end of that presentation, George will answer questions and Gary will help moderate those, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, Gary. Gary's going to go over some of the rules of engagement for the day.
Okay, and just a couple of things, and for you, Diane, I just hit admit all to those that were in the waiting room there and sent a note to one person that needed the link. So I've been a little distracted here, but just for rules of engagement, there's about 300 people in the room. If you could imagine being in a conference hall of 300 people, if everybody speaks at once, you don't hear anything. And so we'd like to ask you to stay muted, and unless I call on you, and for questions, chat the questions. Either Diana, I, and George will see them, and I'll ask George at a convenient time during the presentation. After the presentation, when we get through those questions, I might shift over to calling on you for your questions. And when we get to that point, I want you to raise your hand, and then I'll call on you, and then you unmute yourself and ask the question when we get to afterwards. We've got about 40 minutes or so of presentation, and we're scheduled for about 90 minutes, so we should have plenty of time to answer any questions first on the presentation and then on any Mercedes technical subject. We will entertain questions on the presentation during the presentation, and I'll try to find a convenient place to ask George those questions. We've also limited to the share screens to me, Diana, and George, as Diana mentioned, as a security precaution. So with that, let me introduce our speaker. We are very fortunate today to have National Technical Advisor George Murphy to do our presentation. Now, George has been conducting seminars on Mercedes vehicles at national meetings since 1986. He's a concourse judge. He's a mechanical engineer with graduate work in nuclear engineering. He spent 30 years as a nuclear power engineer. He's the owner of performance analysis company in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. He has owned Mercedes from a 1961 190 SL, various coupes, sedans, roadsters, and currently has a 2014 GLK 430. He works on his own cars. And as I said, he's the national technical director of our club and is a frequent contributor to STAR. So George, welcome. Thank you so much for talking to us today. I'm really looking forward to your presentation, and I'll try not to interrupt you with questions except at the good times for questions. So if you'll go ahead and unmute yourself, George, and we're ready for you.
Oh, I do it. Okay, there it is. Okay. Well, thanks for the introduction. There's 188 people here already. It's exciting. I'm going to cover these cars pretty quickly. There's a lot of nuances to the electronics as the cars progress toward newer and newer cars. And it's hard to deal with all of them at once. But let's see. We'll get the presentation going here. Let me see here. There we go. Okay, I got the screen up. Got a nice big arrow there for you. So as far as electronic microprocessors started with the CISE fuel injection in the '84 European gas models. And it migrated into US models soon after.
Hey, George, I'm not seeing your presentation.
You're not?
Yeah, run through that share screen thing again and have that pop up.
Oh, okay, hang on a minute. Let me get out of this, put it down, and share screen. Oh, my fault now. There it is. Share that. Okay.
There.
That's better?
Mm-hmm.
Now that's better, right?
Yes, I see it.
Okay. All right. As I said, the microprocessors or transistors or solid state, whatever you want to call it, really got started in '84 with the European gas models. And as time went on, we find them in the US models. The next big change really was the MAS motor aggregate system. And that combined a bunch of functions here in one processor. And of course, it made it harder and harder to diagnose and repair. Sometimes the entire module goes out and you got to change the whole thing. So that was not a good deal there as far as a do-it-yourselfer. And I'm always talking about do-it-yourself approach on some of this stuff. So I confuse people. I'm not the engineer that designed it. I'm the guy that monkeys around with it. So 96, the MESFI fly-by-wire throttle came in, much to the chagrin of a lot of members called me and says, my gas pedal isn't connected to a carburetor anymore. And that's right. It's connected to a variable resistance. And also the electronic accelerator, cruise control, and the integrated control systems are all, again, in one module now. So getting more and more complicated and more high level integration of functions. Of course, you can't fix them anymore. You have to replace them. Another thing that came into late 90s was electronic control of variable cam timing, intake manifold changes. So as time goes by, as you're seeing, they're more and more sophisticated, complicated things. You get all of these are driven by meeting the EPA emission standards. My son is a calibration engineer for a company in Austria. And he says, everything you see on these cars is only to meet emission requirements. And you can't go messing around with them as a dealer or as a professional legally. A lot of people chip their cars and things like that, and they're welcome to do it. But talk to my son about that. He'll tell you what chips do, what they don't do. Okay. But very precise fuel ignition it was needed to meet the newer and ever increasing emission requirements. And along with that, they came up with the fault code logging, the socket underneath your dashboard on the driver's side, the OBD2 socket. And it is there mainly because the EPA wants you, and that's only for emissions. It's not going to tell you how to program your power windows or your headlights or anything like that. It's only for emissions. That's what that OBD2 is. And it'll give you a lot of codes. You can buy a $35 reader, plug into that OBD2 and get, if you have a pile of codes there, but you get a little book with it and you look up the code. Maybe your gas tank, your filler cap is loose or whatever. So there's a lot of things that the OBD2 can tell you, but it is not the be all, the end all for diagnosing your cars at all, especially the items that are not emission controls. This system is supposed to last longer. Time will tell. 20-year-old Mercedes Benz, that'd be 2,000 miles at this point, are going cheap because they can't be fixed very easily or inexpensively. And of course, I see the asking prices for high mileage 20-year-old or 18-year-old cars are really low, because when somebody gets into it and they look, they do the right thing and find out what, any fault codes existing in the computer system, it may be very expensive to replace it, and the car may not be worth it. But this high-level integration, very expensive to replace a part. You can't take it apart and fix it anymore. Diagnosis, you have to have expensive equipment. You have to go to the dealer or to a shop who has the diagnostic equipment from Mercedes Benz. The Xentry system is called XENTRY. It's a $36,000 program. So that's what's needed to do a comprehensive diagnosis of the newer cars, actually starting in '96. But some independent mechanics, I can't talk very well, lack access to this. So you have to make sure if you're taking your Mercedes in that they have the diagnostic machine to get the codes and figure out what's wrong. And again, They're not do-it-yourself friendly at all. But I do have some things we'll go into, what you can do as an owner to try and get your car going again. So what is onboard diagnosis? OBD2. Late 80s, California OBD1 came in. You'll see it in California models only from the late 80s. 93 federal cars. That's all 49 states. And as I mentioned, passive monitoring of the emission control, the oxygen sensor, air injection, and a bunch of other stuff. So 96, 50 state monitor system scores fault codes if emissions. Key there is emissions exceed limits. As I said, it's not going to tell you that your power windows are not working. It looks at the catalytic converter, looks at the fuel system, oxygen sensor, fuel evaporation. You know, your fuel tanks are sealed, or actually they're not sealed so much, but they're monitored for leakage. Engine misfire loads. There's a lot of things OBD2 can tell you. And of course, that's when the MIL, check engine light, or service engine soon light. There's different manufacturers use a different word, but it's in the trade, it's MIL, malfunction indicator light. And when they come on, your car may stop running, or it may go into what's called a limp home mode. In other words, you can only go so fast to get to the dealer. So if your check engine light comes on and the car keeps running, okay, do make an appointment to get it fixed soon, because it may be not emissions, it may be some other system in the car is not working well. This thing is in the way. Enhanced monitoring. The fault codes are stored for convenience and safety systems in the enhanced systems, the outside the OBD2. ABS system, ASD, anti-theft, a whole bunch of systems, all can generate fault codes. There's pages and pages of them. The modules in the car are connected by a CAN bus, C-A-N, you probably heard that. It's Controller Area Network, that's called. That's a way of connecting all the modules in the car. We'll get into the SAMs, S-A-M, those are signal acquisition modules. These are the guys that, I'll have pictures of them later, but they take the signal, like say you want to lower your driver's window, that signal goes into the SAM and it sends a signal to the motor, to the CAN, to lower the motor, or lower the window rather, or go up, or whatever function you want to operate in the car. Troubleshooting these systems, a handheld tester, you can buy those for, I don't know, $100 or so. That'll tell you a few things. So if you really like to get into it, buy one of those. There's a lot of them on the market. Check with a local mechanic, the best ones they think are the best. One of the most aggravating things of computers and computer operated devices is self-healing. It goes away, the problem goes away after a while. In your cars, some will go away after a while and the check engine light goes out again because the system either corrected the problem or you got a better connection in a cable or whatever it is. You'll see this, people will get, they'll use their fuel filler cap a little bit loose, and that, they snap into place. If they don't snap it, you'll eventually get a check engine light. And if you go back and check that and snap that fuel filler cap where it's supposed to be, after a few miles or a few starting faults, the check engine light will go away. That was caused by that function. So keep that in mind. Now, other faults aren't so easy to resolve, but the gas cap loose is an easy one. They are extremely, these systems are extremely susceptible to degraded or excessive voltage. Over voltage protection is critical in these cars, as is under voltage. But all these cars have over voltage protection systems. Early cars, you can recognize the OVP relay. It's the one that a plastic cover on the top of it, and a little door you open up and there's a fuse under there. That's the over voltage protection relay. And they're fairly reliable, but as time goes by, sometimes they get a little honky. So it's a good thing. And I've got, again, things you can do to help get your car running again, or at least give it a code. So what happened here? Did I go too far? there we go. Your batteries discharge. Let's see, when the 140 class came out, early 90s, you could park at the airport for 2 weeks, go back, it's dead. That's because there's a lot of systems are still turned on. The door system, the door lock system, and the security remained on. Of course, they pulled the battery down. So that's why over time, Mercedes Benz has gone to 2 batteries. There's the bigger, larger batteries that we're used to seeing. I would call that the starter battery. And they're either under the hood or under the seat or under the floor, depending on what model you've got. So you want to know where it is. In my experience on some of these with the lead acid batteries, which are slowly going away, but between myself and my neighbor who has 2 Mercedes Benz, over time, we both experienced a failure. You drove the car home the night before, it worked fine, come out in the morning, it's dead. It won't start. The battery was bad. We looked at the age of the battery. 4 years, 6 months seems to be the average for a lead acid battery. So when it comes to those, I call them poor quality. They just don't last that long. And that goes for anything. I don't care if it's an interstate or what it is. The flooded or lead acid batteries just seem to fail in that 4 years, 6 months, or even my wife's Prius that has a little battery in it like that. And and both cars, it failed at 4 years, 6 months. That was kind of critical. Newer cars have a limp home mode, and sometimes they'll go into it for no apparent reason. You may even get a check engine light, but you should have them. And Murphy's Law says you take it to the shop, it runs fine. So the mechanic can't figure out what's wrong with it. So if that happens to you, yeah, you'll have to limp home or limp to a garage that can diagnose this anyway. Sometimes people will complain about unintended operation of their seats, door locks, windows, all that. All of a sudden they'll take off. Again, those interferences that take place. Sometimes it's due to degraded voltage. We'll get into that in a little while. But electrically speaking, I have gotten calls. All of a sudden, the person's seat moves forward or back, or it won't move forward or back, either way. So they do that. You get a check engine light and there's no codes. That happens once in a while, although later cars, it's more definitive now. But a lot of problems came from engine wiring harnesses early 90s. Apparently, high heat and humidity degraded them a lot faster than Mercedes Benz, actually the dealer. The story I got was they were required to put in wiring harnesses with insulation that was biodegradable. Well, over here in the United States, and especially in the lower, warmer sections of our country, they biodegraded a little quicker than we wanted them to. And you had wiring harnesses. I've got pictures of some of them, and you just take the outer tape off, just shake the wire, and the insulation just falls off. And unfortunately, some of this happened when you take it in, say, for a spark plug wire change, or sometimes just an air filter. Any movement of the wiring harness with this degraded insulation, and all of a sudden the car doesn't run, or you got codes and everything else. So it's pretty bad. Earlier electronic throttle valves, a lot of them are replaced in the earlier cars when they first came out with the 5-by-wire system. It gave a lot of problems, but that, and it controls the throttle valve on the engine, and the throttle valve is a little motor and drive that operates the intake air from the module. So that system earlier was fairly troublesome, but again, it was the wiring harnesses that gave most of the trouble. The electronic accelerator, cruise control, integrated, I forget what the SC, I'm sorry. But anyway, there's a lot of modules in our cars are all susceptible to this, and we'll get into that. Exhaust gas recirculation has been in the cars since the early 70s. They are newer cars with direct gasoline injection. The air flow into the engine by the intake valve no longer carries fuel vapor because it's injected directly into the cylinder rather than passing by the intake valve. But the EGR valve opens up under certain conditions and recirculates exhaust gas back through the intake, and it builds up a lot of deposits on the intake valves. And they have a process for cleaning them, everything else, but it is a problem with direct gasoline injection. Keep that in mind. Talk over with your shop. Now, later models have gone into a timing of the injector to squirt a little fuel into the intake manifolds from time to time to help keep the intake valves clean of the fouling that happens from the exhaust gas going by it. So that's just a fairly late procedure. I would say 2015 or so on, they started doing that. Depends on the model we're talking about, which engine and everything else. And some of the manufacturers, they recognize this carbon fouling early. So what you can do, you own the car and you want to take care of it, and it's a rolling computer. So here's the things we've got to think about. Do not offer a jump start to anybody with these cars. The voltage perturbations that take place, if you leave your electronic car running while you try to jump another car, the voltage upsets that take place from that jumper can damage or knock out some of your modules. So don't offer jump starts to anybody. That starts actually with 96 model, I would say. If you need a jump start, charge the battery first. Pull it out, put it on the charger. You can get a jump start on the newer cars. Just open the hood and look for a little device has a little red cap on it, a little red cover. You slide that cover, and underneath there's it looks like a blade. Most of the cars I've seen, you can connect the jumper cable to it. That's the positive input for jumping these cars. The negative, of course, nearby is I've seen it brass colored, I guess. Is my car, it's brass. And it's screwed right into the fender well. That's the ground. So that's where you hook it up. In any doubt, get your owner's manual out and look at it. How to jumpstart your car if it's dead. But you should charge the battery first. A totally discharged battery. And when you hook up, say, another car running, you hook up the jumper cables, that totally discharged battery causes quite a voltage perturbation in the car. And again, some of your models don't like that. Those of you who work on your cars, you know about disconnecting battery ground cables when you're going to do any work on your car. Anything electrically, especially. You shouldn't be doing electrical work. I'll get into that later. But always disconnect the battery ground cable. Know where the battery is and undo it. Short trips with the earlier cars don't fully warm up are more susceptible to this carbon fouling problem I talked about. So it's nice to get the car out on a trip, take it, Murphy's tune-up is, see, I'm in Oak Ridge, Nashville's what, 120 miles from me, is I tell them, drive to Nashville in third gear. That'll clean your engine out really good. Or drive 100 miles in one gear lower than the park, or not park, but drive. If you got a 4-speed, run it 3-speed. Remember, these engines are designed to run on the Autobahn at 6,000 RPM. So running 100 miles at 3,500 or 4,000 isn't going to hurt the engine, and it really cleans it out. I know my 99 AMG always ran better after track events because I ran the piss out of it on the track. So, and it helps get the carbon out. Now the newer cars, of course, are subject to carbon fouling. That'll help clean them up. A totally dead battery can damage some modules. So you're going to cause all kinds of problems in the car. And a lot of people just say, oh, I'll charge it up, it'll be fine. They charge it up and it isn't fine. Your car, the modules has gone bad. So,
Hey, George, while we're on batteries,
yeah,
I've got a question that kind of relates to that from Scott Martin. And he mentions that he's got an S600. There's 120 fuse circuits. A number of them are like 5 circuits per fuse, and he's got a parasitic discharge that's running down his battery pretty quickly. He's asking for tips on how to isolate a parasitic discharge when there's like 5 components are sharing the same fuse.
I did that in my 99. It was doing that. My AMG parasitic discharge. And I set up a volt or an ammeter between the negative cable and the negative post on the battery. So any current I could read out on that. And then I proceeded to pull a fuse, look at it, and if no change in the engine draw, I'd put that one back, pull the next fuse. Go through each fuse one by one. and see which fuse causes the current to, the high current to go away. So it worked for me. I found out I had something that was, I've forgotten how a problem was many years ago, but that's one way to do it. There are fuse boxes all over our cars now. My 99 had fuse one in the trunk, one under the hood. Some of them have extra fuses in the left side of the instrument panel. You got to open the door to see it. That's just one of several fuse boxes. So that's a way you could do that and figure out what it is. Or you can go into a dealer or mechanic who's got a diagnostic tool and they'll figure it out right away. But that'll cost you at least an hour's labor on their part. So, but that's a way to do it. Late 124, 140s, 202s had the battery in the trunk now, which is good. Some cars, some 210E class had them under the back seat. Now, Volkswagen Bugs did that. And you could tell when the battery was gassing off because it would eat up the seat cushion, and you sit on it, and you sit down on the battery, short the battery, and you get a lot of heat and smoke out of it. Volkswagens were famous for that. I did hear of it happen with somebody with a 210 E-Class, that their battery was under the seat, and it did degrade the cushion above the battery. So keep in mind that these batteries have vents on them. They vent off hydrogen gas. This is lead acid batteries we're talking about. So it's a little hose connected to the side of the battery. Make sure that's there. If you don't put that there, hydrogen gas generated by charging cycles can build up, especially if the battery is like in the SLs, they've got a closed case. And there was a couple of cases of explosion hazard because there's relays not far away from the batteries in the trunk. And if that little vent hose isn't there, the hydrogen gas can build up, and any nearby relay that takes off, that generates a spark and you get an explosion. The Optima AGM batteries, that's the latest thing, AGM type, I'll call it, because Mercedes Benz has AGMs in them now. I started out using Optima about 20 years ago. They last a long time. They're very rugged batteries. You don't have to worry about adding acid or nothing like that. Get them with a higher cold cranking amplifiers. Cold cranking amps. They don't leak. They're used in airplanes, stunt planes, because they don't leak when they go upside down. Most newer Mercedes Benz from the early 2000s have AGM batteries. Or if you replace your lead acid, just replace it with an AGM. There's nothing special about it. 12 volts is 12 volts. And as long as the battery physically fits, that's all you want. But I put one in my 99 201K, that's my AMG car. And I had to make a slight modification to the battery hold down back there in the trunk. But if you got an older car and you want to switch them over, be aware you may have to change the battery hold down clamp where it goes. But that's not hard to do. Dual battery cars, I already said, do not jump start these cars. The dual battery cars, by the way, there's a module that connects them to them and it monitors the condition of both batteries, the battery in the trunk and the battery up front, and allocates current to keep them both fresh all the time. But when they get old, then you start having problems.
Hey, George, on dual battery cars, we have a question from Dan DiFrancesco. He says he has a 2013 GL 450, and he was wondering what the proper procedure is for changing both the primary and the smaller backup battery at the same time. He's, of course, aware of the mechanical procedure of replacing the battery, but he's worried about protecting the electronics and resetting and the sequence of steps to protect them.
What I do, and I recommend, and I've done it, is open the hood, find the jump starter terminals, and hook up a battery tender to those. Battery tender provides no more than 2 amps, which is just fine, and it keeps all your computer systems up while you change the batteries. It keeps the system live. Number one. Number two, take the key out of the car, especially the keyless go cars, and put the key in the house. Mercedes-Benz says a minimum of 2 meters away from the car. So put the key away. Do not leave it in the ignition. or in your pocket. Take it out of your pocket, put it in the house if you're going to do any electrical work on these cars. Because the key is within a few feet of the car is looking for it. That means that system is on. But to change dual batteries, if you have an extra battery, hook it up to the jumper posts or a battery tender or something like it. You know, I use them all. I use mine a lot, but that'll keep the car up to power, and you can change your battery. And mechanically, of course, be careful pulling the wires off it and all that. But mechanically, you should know what he's doing there, I'm sure. But from an electronic standpoint, I just like to power up the car with something that keeps it up while you change out those two batteries. Other than that, once you hook everything back up again, disconnect the battery change, it's as if you never did anything. Everything works just fine. But now, there are other things we can do that go against that kind of in a way. I'll get into it in a minute. If you want to check a battery or actually an electrical system in a car, is hook up the voltmeter to the battery. Turn off everything, start the car, run the engine with the voltmeter reading the voltage at the battery. And you should have no less than 13.8 volts and no more than about 14.6 at 1500 RPM engine speed. It's kind of a crude test, but tells you, yeah, my charging system is working. The alternator is putting out the correct voltage. If it's below 13.8, on a high mileage car, you may only need a new regulator. Actually, it needs brushes, what it is, but the brushes are part of the regulator. So just buy a new regulator and put it in the alternator. Regulators are not that expensive and they're not that hard to change. But a high mileage alternator, say over 150,000 miles, the brushes start to wear and the voltage coming out of the battery just starts to go down. And that's all they needed, a new regulator, everything's fine. So keep that in mind for some of the other ones.
Hey, George, on that topic, question from Scott Martin. His car is a 2013 E350. He says he sees 15.1 volts after he starts it when it's been sitting. After 10 minutes or so, it goes to 12.4 to 12.8 volts, like it's not charging. He says it runs fine. The resting voltage is probably 12.2 when he gets in it. But he's wondering what we should see for a peak voltage, and in cars with variable alternators, what the resting voltage should be.
All right, first start, it goes over 14.6 and then drops down below. I want to know the age of the battery. If it's 4 to 5 years old, be thinking about changing it. Again, I'd want him to contact me or go to the dealer, and I will look up the actual voltage, what it should be in that model, because it varies depending on what's in the car, all the options and stuff like that. So I don't know what the mileage is, a high mileage car or not, but again, the alternator is a little bit suspect, at least the regulator suspect at that point. So that's what I would check. But one thing I've seen a lot of people forgot about, they take the car into a mechanic, and let's say they change the transmission. And one of the bolts that holds the transmission bell housing to the engine, generally in our cars, has a big cable under it, which the other end of the cable is bolted to the body of the car. That's an extremely important cable, and sometimes they're left loose or not there at all. If they're not there at all, you really have problems. That completes the DC electrical circuit from the battery positive through the car and back to the negative cable. But part of that has to flow through that cable between the engine and the body. Generally, it's found on a bolt, the bell housing. And if you're under the car messing around, reach up there with a wrench once in a while, just loosen a half a turn on the bolt, tighten it again. That gives you better contact surface. The same on the bolt on both ends of that cable. There's another one screws it into the body of the car. But that's a very important cable, and I've gotten calls from people who had problems, and they checked that cable, and one guy found his was dangling. He couldn't get the car to start. That's because the starter didn't get the complete circuit, because in a Mercedes Benz, in most cars, the engine, transmission, the whole drivetrain is found in rubber, is virtually isolated from the chassis, except for this cable. Now, there are other wires between the engine and the body, and those are the poor things that carry this high voltage if this cable isn't there, and of course they burn out. And that's what can happen if this ground cable is left off after some kind of work on the car, and they try to start it and wonder why they burn up some wires. That's because those wires are completing the circuit. And of course, when you're starting the car, the starter's pulling maximum amps, so it does in the cables. Do not connect electrical devices to the wiring. There are original equipment sockets in the cars, the newer ones. There, a lot of people just like to find a wire. It's got 12 volts. Oh, heck, I'll just clip into it. We're going to get into that, why you should not do that. This is a SAM, okay? Signal Acquisition Module. And then my car, my 2014 GLK has 4 of these in the car. Some of the newer ones have 6 or more maybe. But these are all connected by this CAN network. And they're the ones that seg the signals out to do things like when you push your brake pedal, that signal goes through the CAN to a SAM, one of the SAMs in the car, probably the one in the back. And that SAM then lights up your brake lights. So you see how important these things are. And when you see one, don't mess with it other than if you have electrical problems, it's okay to disconnect these one at a time. Or let me back off, disconnect the battery negative cable. Then disconnect these one at a time and plug them in again. In high humidity or coastal conditions, we've noticed that the connection, just the electrical connections in these things can get a little bit corrosion on them. And just by moving them in and out, unplugging it, plugging in again, you scratch new contact and things start to work better again. So, because see how small these wires are? They're not carrying 12 volts anymore. They're just carrying a signal. So be aware of it. Again, do not clip into any of these wires. Just leave them alone. Do not use wiretaps anywhere in a new car, in a new Mercedes. I'd say starting in '96. Those little things you can clip on and grab 12 volts. Here's the grounding wires here. That's another place we have to look at in our cars for problems. You see these brown wires. In a Mercedes Benz, all grounds are brown. And in this case, I think I took this picture in my GL. No, I didn't. This came out of a magazine. This stud here grounds these wires. It doesn't hurt to loosen that about a turn and tighten it again every now and then. We have seen like these fancy new headlights on the cars. One light goes out, the other one's on, it's happily on, or one goes bright, one goes dim. What's going on? And 9 times out of 10, look for behind that headlight assembly on the fender, brown wires under a screw. Loosen it and retighten that. Get a better ground for that module in the headlights, especially the halogen, the xenon discharge. Those are monstrously complicated device, and they really got a good ground. So that's another thing with our electronic cars. Things act up a little bit, like a headlight or something like that. Find the ground wires for it and loosen and retighten this ground. Now some grounds are hidden under it, behind the dash, place like that. You can't reach them easily, but in the trunk and under the hood, you'll see areas where there's brown wires underneath the screw, and just doing that will greatly get things to work. Do it yourself. Okay, here's a case where I've gotten cars running again, or electronics cleared up. We call a reboot. Okay, is disconnect the battery ground cable for 60 seconds on both batteries. If it's got 2 batteries, take them both loose. And everything in the battery in the car, it just goes down, just like your home computer. It just goes to its, I don't know what they call it, but it's pretty well down. And then if you've got, like that SAM, you think there's a problem with the SAM or something like that, while the cables are off, disconnect and reconnect those connectors. And the same goes for connectors for taillights and headlights, any kind of electrical connector you see, or on the engine even. The engine, of course, has a big one with all these pins. Doesn't hurt to take it loose and reconnect it again. Some people like to spritz a little bit of contact cleaner on. Don't overdo it. It's just a little spritz. Put it back together, and be surprised sometimes you get things working better again. My 99 AMG started to act up a little bit electrically one time, and I went through this and it completely changed the character of the car. My remote unlocking, it wouldn't work till I was like 3 feet from the door. I can unlock it remotely from 20 feet away after that. My stereo system sounded much better after I did this. So just doing this, disconnecting and reconnecting with it, like I said, get you better ground connect or better connections. Especially the newer cars, as I said, they're not carrying 12 volts anymore, and 12 volts could burn through you a lot of corrosion in an older car, and it wasn't really a problem. But the new cars, sometimes they're on the order of milliamps going through those cables, and it doesn't take a whole lot of corrosion to intercept the signal. So you clean the contact pins on a suspected module that way, but make sure you disconnect the cable. You can buy a fault code reader. Harbor Freight has them for $35 if you want one. Matter of fact, one of our guys got it. It works. It tells you some codes if you have problems. There's codes there. You plug it in the OBD socket. That's well, it's about above your knees when you're driving the car. It's down in that under dash panel. So that'll give you some help there. What's wrong and where to look for the problems. If it talks about fuel mixture stuff like that, well, you might look at the wiring on the engine. Maybe find some connectors, disconnect and reconnect them. The manufacturer enhanced codes. These are outside OBD2. These are the codes for everything else in the car. This is the seats, the windows, cruise control, everything else. And those require a more expensive device, a handheld tester or the Zentry diagnostic system, $36,000 that your dealer has. So when you get the codes you can't figure out, you can't get them to go away, then you'll have to go to your mechanic who has the diagnostic equipment. Mercedes Benz dealers do have it. So if you're buying a used Mercedes Benz, most dealers don't CPO them after 5 years, but some people negotiate on them. That's you get a warranty on it. Have them take it in the shop, do a complete diagnostic on it. No fault codes existent. This goes along with a record of all the work that's been done on the car. Take it for a drive, stuff like that. So look at the maintenance history to see if it had any recurring faults. Now, if you're really nice to your dealer or service manager, ask him for the VMI, Vehicle Maintenance Inquiry. And they can print that out, and it will list all the work done on the car by Mercedes-Benz dealers. And some dealers are kind of snotty, they won't give them to you, but if you ask nice, especially if they make a condition you're going to buy that used car, I want the VMI on it. I got the VMI on my AMG, and it was the one thing, the tires kept going out on it. They put better tires on it. Anyway, the VMI is a good thing if you can get it. The aftermarket maintenance and history, yeah, but that's only as good as the people that report to it. So you really don't know what you're going to get. What is it, CarMax, something like that. And it's okay to get them, but just take it with a grain of salt because they're only as good as the people who report to them. Some of the newer CDI diesels had the same problems, the E-Class diesels, electronic problems, not with the engine so much as in the chassis. I think it was, again, some of the early ones was the wiring harnesses. CDI engines in this country, and I understand why Mercedes-Benz is kind of reticent to even sell them anymore, is our cetane, diesel cetane level is like octane only for diesel fuel, 10 points lower than European fuel. I've been to Europe a couple of times and rented cars, diesels. I was astounded at how quiet and how much power they had. And when I filled them up, diesel fuel looked like water. It was so clear. Where in this country it's kind of yellowish. So that was, which was a sulfur, but they take out a lot of the sulfur out of it, which was a lubricant for the injection pump. And our U.S. fuel is by law somewhat lower in lubricity than European diesel fuel. So keep that in mind with older diesels from the late 90s. Some of them had metal filings found in the fuel system, and the CDI pump had to be replaced. And unfortunately, this happened after the warranty was out. And some owners really got bit by big costs on some of these. It's something to remember on diesels. So, but that kind of completes everything. I'll be glad to answer questions. Here's my write this down, or if you have it. That's my email address. Here's my phone number. And I'm available. Call or email me, and specific questions at any time. This is what I do for the club. It's kind of a technical hotline. If I don't have an answer, I'll find it for you, or I'll refer you to somebody who can answer it. We have about a dozen technical experts in different fields, all the way all the way back into the 113 SLs. Have agreed to take questions that I don't have an answer for, but I just route them to them. They take care of it. Pete Lessler is our 113 SL expert, for instance. Also, Becker, one of the guys at Becker Auto Radio with your Becker systems, things like that. So I don't have all the answers, but I hope I can find you the guy who does have the answer if I don't have it. So feel free to contact me by 9 to 5 most days, and until 1 o'clock on Fridays. But always leave a message. I'll get back to you. And same with email. I'll get back to you. Sometimes my email gets pretty loaded up. It takes me a day or two to get back to it. So,
George, I've got a couple of questions I'll ask you from the chat, and then I'll just call on people for their questions.
Sure.
One of the questions had to do with a battery trickle charger, and it was basically, as I roll back to it, should we be leaving a trickle charger on full time or just a few days a month? And should we trickle charge both batteries? The car is 2006 CLS 500 with 35,000 miles. It's only driven in nice weather, but I think it's general for all of our cars.
The battery tender brand, the little green ones, you can hook that up to your jumper post under the hood and just leave it on indefinitely, because it monitors the condition of the battery and the electrical system. And of course, the little battery, say the little one in the trunk, the second one there, it also is monitored by the module that looks at the batteries, and it will feed the maintaining voltage to it to keep it fresh. So a battery tender type. Do not use a battery charger unless you can select 2 amps. No more than 2 amps is what you want to use. So, and that's what I like about battery tenders. It's all they're limited to.
Okay.
And they have a circuit in there to protect your battery and everything else. So you can leave them. I tell people, for long-term storage, put the battery tender on the battery. It'll be fine.
Okay. And there's a question here about how often do you have to replace a secondary or backup battery?
If it's a lead acid battery, in my experience, between the 4th and 5th year, take a look at it. It's an AGM battery, probably lasts longer. But again, if your car has the 2 batteries, it's got the battery control module in there, and you'll get a fault code when that battery starts to fail. That comes through this monitor, and it'll give you a light on the dash, probably a little battery symbol. And if you pull the codes, it'll say, battery voltage degraded or whatever. So if that's the case, the first thing to do is go in there and slightly loosen the bolts on the clamp on the battery and rotate the cable back and forth and then tighten it again on both of them. And check the ground cable too, if you can find the end of it, make sure it's grounded properly. Sometimes that'll do away with a signal that you have a degraded battery, just because they come loose.
Okay, another battery question. And George, I'd suggest maybe come out of screen share so we can see your smiling face now.
Oh, okay. How do I do that? Hang on. There we go.
Question is, what is acceptable voltage level when the car is off and has been sitting for 2 or 3 days?
Well, 2 or 3 days, most lead acid.
Hit the red button at the top of your screen there to come out of screen.
Oh, here we go. I'm sorry.
Yep, there you are.
Okay. 2 or 3 days, a fresh battery should stay, above 12.4 volts. As they get old, they start to degrade. That voltage falls off over time. And depending on your electrical system on a newer car, Once you start up and the alternator picks up, it'll charge the battery up and you'll be fine. But you won't know unless you have a voltmeter attached to the battery. You won't really know its condition unless you're monitoring it like that. That's one of the things that the newer cars with 2 batteries and battery control module, it looks at both batteries and it'll tell you if one or both are degraded.
Okay, there's another battery question. This is Scott Martin again on parasitic drains. He's wondering if a parasitic drain is caused when the alarm backup battery fails.
Alarm backup battery fails. I'd have to look that up in the workshop system, electronics. Never heard of it failing. It's just a little bitty thing, probably. It's just, like in your cell phone battery, something like that. Keeps that system going when you walk away from the car. So if it's failed, you could test your anti-theft system, lock the car and then try and get into it or do something. If the alarm doesn't go off, the system isn't arming itself. But again, the newer cars, the security system will give you a code, tell you that.
Okay. I'd like to call on Joey Costa, who has a somewhat involved question that I'd like him to just go ahead and ask. Joey, you still there? Unmute yourself and ask that question. Joey Costa.
Right here. Hi, guys. Thanks for letting me talk. George, thanks for this show you got here. Bottom line is this: you mentioned the Sentry system, and I'm one of those. I have one of those multiplexers. I have a scope. I sniff the CAN bus. You name it. I do everything I can to know every aspect of my car. That's great. So we're one of those, right? But the problem is, I find there's only 2 ways you can do this. You go and be real good buddies with a tech at a dealer, which is very hard to find nowadays, or you go on the ground and go to the forums, and it's very dangerous because half these people have no idea what they're doing. So what I'm wondering is, how can we, as a club, start setting something like this up? I mean, there's a very serious support avenue. I understand that. You have to pay a little bit of money, you have to buy some stuff. I get all that. But as our cars age, and mind you, these cars are now in the 2010s, right? There's so much stuff in it. We're driving computers on wheels. And I'd like to have this car. Don't laugh at me. I keep my cars 20, 30 years. I'd like to keep this one that long. But with electronics, unless you have a buddy at TSMC who makes the chips for you, you have to know how to maintain your car. So how do you feel about setting something like that up?
Well, like I say, you can do the OBD tick for some of the things, but car like with the air suspension, you need a diagnostic program to see what's wrong with it. It'll tell you, there's all those sensors on it, the height sensors and all that. So a lot of times, some of the problems will crop up. A good website to go through is, what's the company that makes the replacement struts for it? Arnott, A-R-N-O-T-T, Arnott. They've got quite a nice website on troubleshooting air suspension systems. But from what I've read, by the way, I am allowed to look in on another independent mechanics database that where they submit a question or problem with the car and how they fixed it, or they want help with fixing it. It's independent from Mercedes Benz, but they're friends of mine, and I get copies of all the things that come in, and I see the problems that I'm seeing with the air suspension is cables. Hoses. The hoses are leaking. If you get any kind of a leak in your system and it's leaking down, that means your compressor has to work to bring it back up again once you start the car. But under certain circumstances, if you still got a leak and you're driving the car and the compressor's cycling every now and then, you've got a problem because it's going to burn itself out taking care of those leaks. So with the air suspension system, that's the one major thing I'm seeing is a leak someplace causes a compressor to cycle more often, and eventually it burns itself out for big bucks. So that Arnott website, A-R-N-O-T-T, is a good place to go for a lot of this hints on troubleshooting and what to, of course, they'll sell you struts if you need it, but sometimes it's not the struts. It's the hoses from the compressor, or maybe the compressor control, or maybe the height adjustment stuff. But a lot of those things cannot be, unless you have, or take it into a dealer diagnostic tool, and they can plug it in and they can interrogate the whole suspension system and see where the problem is. So, yeah, they're very complex, and you know, they had air suspension on the old 600s back in the late 60s and early 70s, and the 6.3s, and they were so troublesome they got rid of them. Now they went back to them again, of course, with computers and all this stuff, and that just made them that much more complex again. But the most failures I'm seeing is a leak someplace causes the compressor to cycle too much, and of course eventually it burns itself out or something else. So I don't know, does that help you or not?
Well, I mean, that's a very good example, but I'm just thinking as a club, can we set up I don't know, I guess an advanced support section, because this is not common, right? I mean, not too many people want to go replace their wheels, go into Century, re-enter their TPMS unit so that they don't have to go to the dealer. I mean, I love doing stuff like that, and many of us do, but it's not a common thing. So I don't want to, you know, encumber the whole club with this, but there has to be a way where we gather, you know, half a dozen, like you say, a dozen experts, and have this resource available as a club. I've asked Steve Ross, my San Diego guy here, about setting up something like that, and you know, Steve's really busy, but this is maybe a good forum for this, because this is a techie forum, right? That's what this is. And again, as our cars age, and sometimes dealers are not necessarily up to speed on cars that are, you know, 20 years old, even though they're very advanced full of electronics. So as you know, aficionados of our Benz cars, you know, how do you think you can set something like that up? I don't know. I'll do whatever. Just let me know.
Well, first of all, this entry system is $36,000, and that's not something, you know, you're going to buy for your own use. But the dealers, of course, use it, and some independent mechanics have bought it. Some have bought the bootlegs that came from God knows where. Problem with those is they're not updated and not the latest information's in them, so they may not cover your car if you go into them. So,
right. But
yeah, now as far as the workshop information system, our club has one subscription to it. I have the passwords, get into it, and I've let it be known to everybody, if you have a procedure you want to go, let's say you want to pull a door panel off a car or something like that, tell me you must send me the VIN for the car and tell me what you need, like the procedure for, say, removing a door panel. Okay, I will get those procedure steps and email them to you. So, and the same goes for the air suspension. Operations, maintenance and operations that are in the workshop information system. We call it the WIS. I have access to that. That's the same system that the mechanics at the dealer go into for, you know, how to change out something or nothing else. It's not a diagnostic. Like the entry is diagnostic. The WIS is actually doing the work. How to change out something, do this and do that. How to change a battery even. And I looked it up. It's pretty straightforward. But some of them can be rather complicated. So keep that in mind. You can come through me. I'll be glad to send you any of the workshop system relevant to what you want to do. The Zentry, like I say, you got to go to the dealer or somebody that has it. And they can pull the codes and that'll tell them what's wrong, and then you can fix it. But as a club, I don't quite see how that's going to work unless you can get Mercedes Benz corporate to agree club members to get, say, a free diagnostic at a dealer, which I doubt they'll do. But because dealers pay $36,000 for it, plus the training that goes with it. I think there's 3 months of training you have to go when they first started that system. But I've gone online and looked at what it takes to buy it, and the training that you have to go through and everything else. And then and it's updated just about every day. It's updated with new information or special things to be aware of in solving electronic problems in the cars. So just keep that aware. I don't know if that helps you out or not, Joey.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you for your information. I'll bug you a little bit later about it. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's move on to a few other questions. From Mike Roth asks, Is the voltage displayed on the command screen accurate? He also asked, did Mercedes remove lead from their solder and replace lead with tin?
Voltmeter displayed on your screen on a newer car?
It says
Might
voltage
be a
displayed on
way
the
to
command
do
screen.
it. I have never seen it on my 14 GLK, but I haven't really gotten into all the other systems in the in the screen that you can go to. Again, look at your owner's manual. It'll tell you what you can get into. So soldering, I don't know what. See, these modules are made by subcontractors, Bosch, VDO, and all that. I don't know what they're using. The printed circuit boards, I'm sure the solder, you look at the backside of a circuit board and it's green, and then you see all these solder points. Those are all done, by robots, all that stuff. But I don't know what the composition of the solder is, and I'm sure from a health standpoint, there's nothing to worry about in your cars. That helps.
Mike follows up. He says, yeah, it's under service dynamic. So let's move her over to a different question. Here's Dennis, who says he has a 2015 SL550 for a summer car and a 2018 GLE 450 for a winter ski car. He says the off-season car is kept in a rental garage that has no power or heat in it. How would you recommend I maintain the batteries for my off-season car?
Ooh, no power, huh?
That's a challenge.
Yeah. Well, one thing you should be aware of is if you have to use E10 ethanol fuel in your area, try to find a gas station that has real gasoline and fill the tank. Now, how do you find real gasoline in your area? There's a website called puregas.org. It's PURE-GAS-ORG. The word pure-gas.org. And it'll come up and it'll show you, or you pick out what state you're in, click on it, and it lists all the stations in that state that have real gasoline. Like, for instance, here in Oak Ridge, my Sunoco distributor has 93 octane real gas. That's what I use in all my Mercedes Benz. It's my neighbor and everybody else I tell. Now, if you have to store that poor thing with ethanol in it, buy Stabil additive. They have they have an additive for long-term storage of ethanol gasoline. It offsets the deleterious effects of it because the E10 fuel degrades after 3 months. It's pretty bad off. So you can store the car for 6 months. First start it up, you'll think, well, it's not running very well. You take to the dealer, they spend thousands, they can't figure it out. It's just rotten gas. E10 is rotten after 3 months. So if you can, fill it with real gasoline. If you can't, run out all that E10 fuel in there, and then put fresh gas with this additive in it to offset the bad effects. But storage, gasoline wise. Now electrical, if you have no power, nothing else, you can take the batteries out of the car and put them in the house. Keep them warm, put them on a battery tender, and that'll take good care of them over the winter, and then you put them back in the car. And when you do that, open your owner's manual and it reads you how to reset everything. The windows, steering wheel, the sliding roof, soft top operation, operate all those power operated devices, because the computer that runs the darn things has been dead. It doesn't know up and down and everything else. And that's why you have to exercise. And those are in the owner's manuals. My 2014 GLK owner's manual tells you what to do if you disconnect the battery, how to reset my windows and all this other stuff. So for long-term storage is take care of the fuel, put the batteries in the house, and we crank up the car. I'll get a lot of calls from people in Florida or Maine or New England anyway, because they're coming back to their long stored car, and they complain that it doesn't run well, or their dealer told them it needed a lot of work. I said, just run that old fuel out of it and fill up it. I give them the website for puregas.org and put real gas in it, and let's try it out, see what happens. So that's what I would do.
On a related note from Jonathan Deal, he says he has a 2019 A220. And he says he remembers hearing about having to have some special procedure done to the car if it was left stationary for more than 6 weeks or so at a time. Do you know what procedure is being talked about?
I haven't seen anything on the new A-Class. It should be something in the owner's manual. You should read through it. A lot of people don't do that. Car is the second most expensive thing after a house and a college education for your kid. Then the car, second or third most expensive thing. You should read the manual. But my manual tells me what to do for long-term storage. And that's a 14 model. So for a 19 A-Class, if it's not in the owner's manual, send me an email. I'll see what I can find out from my contact at Mercedes Benz.
Peter Sullivan has 2 questions. I'd like to call on him to ask them. They're a little bit longer and more complex. Peter, you still with us? Peter Sullivan? Peter?
Yes, sir.
Okay, come on up.
Okay. Relates to the fob. Is that the one that you've got?
Yeah, what I saw there was GLE Energizer Plus, and whether you'll be able to use Android with it, and the keyless fob thing that you have to shake to work.
Well, I'll touch the keyless fob thing because it's kind of silly and it's easy. There's a security feature in the new keyless fobs to prevent the bad guys from activating your keyless fob as a way to break into your car. But the problem is that the motion detector that turns off the fob is not very sensitive. The net result is that you have to shake it because sometimes it doesn't work. You'll use the fob, you'll get out of the car to lock the car and the fob won't work. Or actually you'll touch the handle and the car won't lock. But if you shake the fob, then it'll work just fine. That's a quick, easy fix if you've experienced this problem. My wife has. But my question also is, I wonder if they're going to come out with a fix in the form of a newer version of that fob.
The problem with those electronic keys, I've got it in my car too, is they're changing all the time. And to come out with a key match your car, they say it's 2 or 3 years old, it's going to be tough. Best I would do with your key is take it apart, put a new battery in it, see if that makes a difference. Maybe you've done that.
Well, no, actually, it really is. It's the motion detector. Some of these bad guys use a computer and communication-based hacking system, and they trigger the fob. They trigger the car to send a signal to the fob. They intercept that, and then the fob responds. They intercept that, and then they send that to the car, and it unlocks it. So what it does is the motion detector, if the fob has been inactive for a while, it turns off the fob, and you have to move it to activate it.
Yeah, that's something new to me. How would they'd have to, or the key fob would have to be near them. I mean, the key fob doesn't have indefinite range.
That's right.
That means they've got to be close to you or close to the key anyway to do this operation.
Well, that's why they tell you, George, not to store the key fob near your garage or near your front door if you're keeping the car in the driveway. This is something relatively new that apparently they introduced as part of the 2020 keyless go system.
Okay, yeah, that's fairly
times that guys had broken into cars.
Yeah. Older car, you could just wrap the fob in aluminum foil.
Right.
By that. But if that's new for the 2020s, I'll have to look in the owner's manuals for 2020 and see if I see what that's all about. But
we haven't found anything in the owner's manual yet.
Yeah.
And you also in the 2020, particularly in the GLE 450, they have a feature called Energizer Plus, and if you're using a Garmin smartwatch, so with an Apple phone with the Me Mercedes feature in it, and you have the Energizer Plus with the fancy massage seats, actually read your vital signs
Oh, geez.
to the car, whether you are being stressed.
Yeah.
And it will suggest an exercise massage program that would suit your condition. But it only works with the iOS system, although they've indicated, Mercedes has, that they're going to bring it up to date, probably with the FUP software update, that it will also run on Android. And I'm wondering when in the world they're going to get around to it.
Good question. The newer cars, some of these newer features that are coming out, the information, I usually can't find it for another 6 months.
Yeah.
Look around, but I've read something like that. Yeah, like my car, it shows a little cup of coffee when it thinks I've been driving too long. But
Well,
that's kind of
Otto Kalenius made a big deal announcing this at CES 2018, and it's still not fully activated.
Yeah, it's probably, I don't know, Mercedes Benz goes through quite a design review before they put any of those new things in the cars. Even then, they give trouble. So I haven't seen anything on it. If there's nothing in the owner's manual, I'm not quite sure, who has the information on it. If you want to send me an email, I'll see if I can get my contact to reveal anything about it. Some of it, they keep it pretty close to the chest.
That'd be terrific, George, because I've emailed to the German designer who was involved in setting this feature up, and he never even gave me the courtesy of a return email.
Well, that's just the beginning of the steps that something like that takes. I mean, first of all, it's proprietary. He legally can't reveal it, maybe, but it goes through a lot of designers and changes before you ever see it in a car that's sold to a customer. So,
thank you, George. I'll send you an email.
all right, good enough. I'll look for it.
I see a couple of VMI questions. One of the questions was, what's the earliest year model that vehicle maintenance indexes or VMIs are available for? And another question was, I can't get my dealer to give me the VMI on my car.
Now, I've got a friendly service guy at my dealer, so they'll do it for me. But yeah, they kind of keep it close to the chest. I don't know how to get them to give it to you. As far as how early they are, I think I've seen them back as far as 78. I had a brand new 78 300D I bought new, and there was a VMI on it. That was several years ago, but I don't know if they knock them off after so many years. So I'm not sure much back in the late 70s are even available, but it's worthwhile that. Now, if your dealer I wouldn't ask a salesman or go to the service manager, get friendly with him, and see if the service manager will do it. Tell them what you want it for. Sometimes they'll tell you it's a privacy thing. They'll say if you print it out, just take scissors and cut off the previous owner or something like that, because it does have the previous owner listed on it. The VMI I got for my 99 AMG, they gave it to me, and I looked at the owner's manual. I knew who had it anyway. It doesn't matter, but the name was on it, and I tell them, people offer to cut off the name of any prior owners. Maybe they'll ask them to do it. Kind of reason with the guy a little bit, but that you aren't looking to rob anybody or something like that. But if there's any names in there or something like that, they don't give it to you from privacy regulations.
That's certainly been my experience too. I was able to get for my car, but I've got a good relationship with the service writer at the local dealership.
Yeah.
There's a question here that follows up on the car sitting in an unpowered garage. The question's, is there a battery-powered battery tender that you can use and swap out? I've never heard of such a thing. Have you?
No, I haven't. I bought my battery tender, had a little booklet with it and everything else. It doesn't mention anything like that. So I mean, whatever battery you use, unless it's a humongous 24 volt with a voltage splitter or something like that, it'll last all winter. But maybe, how about this? Let's put a wind generator up on the roof, and that'll keep them charged up. You
Well,
got some kind of a circuit, you know, to provide the 2 amp.
yeah, I've got a lot of battery tenders, and I've actually got 2 solar-powered battery tenders on cars in places that don't have power. So that's an alternative if you can get to the sun on those things.
Yeah, if you can get sun on it, yeah.
And then there's a couple of mentions of that in the chat too.
Yeah.
And, oh, there's a question that's, I see a couple of hands up. I'm not going to call on them yet because I've still got some chat questions. Please say again the information about older cars with biodegradable harness.
In the early 90s, 92 to 96 or 90, around in there, yeah. E-Class and S-Class, wiring would, the insulation started to degrade, but this would be after, well, some cars as early as 80,000 miles, a lot of them up to about 140, 150,000 miles. And it was exacerbated by high humidity and high temperature. So Florida, Texas, you know, those areas experienced more, but as time went on, the effect was seen further and further north. And I was out in Seattle giving a tech session a couple of years ago, and a guy with a 92 500 SL showed me a picture of his wiring harness. And, you know, he pulled back the outer covering and the wires are just flaking off, or the insulation just flaking off the wires. So there's a, it happens, usually the effect shows up when somebody disturbs the harness, like when they want to change the spark plugs or something like that. And they move that harness around, then the insulation just kind of falls off and the wires start to touch each other and you get all kinds of engine problems. And they've eliminated, I mean, they've gone back to good insulation in the late 90s, I think 96 or 97, newer. You know, it's not a problem anymore, but it was for a while. And it sure aggravated a whole lot of owners, I'll tell you.
Okay. Let me go ahead and call on someone with their hand raised. I've got Molly Mondrell. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, Gary, I've got a 2010 ML 350, and just a generic comment. Anyone wanting to add a trailer hitch, say a U-Haul type of application,
Yep.
that's just laying yourself open for the electrical complications on computer things that George was talking about. So be very hesitant to have any aftermarket mechanic add a trailer hitch or some other type of option to your car, because it can really upset the apple cart with wiring. And I know, Gary, you've said something to me a while ago highlighting that also.
I wrote an article on that, and I added a hitch and wiring to my 14 GLK. It's easy to do. eTrailer.com makes nice hitches. Let me back up a little bit. Unless your ML or your car does not have a trailer hitch from the factory,
Yes, that's the case.
you cannot add it electrically. You can't add it. You could probably find one to bolt in there, but electrically is where you're going to have the problem. You're right. Here's what you do is I bought eTrailer.com. I bought a hitch that bolted perfectly up, 5,000 pound rated to my GLK. Now, wiring, there's a company, Takancha is the name of it. Send me an email. I'll send you the article. But what it does is it uses inductive pickups that clamp around the stoplight and the running light. It just clamps around. It doesn't dig into them. It sends a signal to a little module. And that module then hooks into your trailer wiring or your brake wiring, whatever you want. I pull a trailer with my GLK all the time now. All the lights work and no electrical upsets because the trailer wiring is getting its signal from inductive pickups clamped around the wire. And this system, and I'll send, if you send me your email, I'll send you the copy of the article. You can, but I think it's not very, it's $100 some odd, and it's perfectly good instructions. It really goes together. And of course, if you don't want to go to your dealer and have them put a hitch on, my hitch was, I think, under $200, and it bolted up perfectly. I've got pictures of it and everything else. But I've been through that hitching. I researched it all, and I knew what would happen if you tap into wires. And you don't do that, because I read this article before I even knew about that. But I'll send it to you, and you can do it with it work just fine.
I'll do that. Yeah, Gary, that was my comment just to caution everyone else to be careful if someone's going to hack into your wiring harness, because it can really cause problems. So I'll send you the information. I appreciate the article then. Thank you.
And there's some people, they want to add other stuff in their glove compartment, and somebody wanted a GPS or something. And I told them, that's fine, but where are you going to get your 12 volts? You're going to have to run a wire to the cigarette lighter, which is, those lighter sockets are just that, for running accessories. But you don't go find some wire that has 12 volts and you clip into it there, because boy, your SAM sees that and it just goes nuts. Doesn't know what's going on, because the SAM either have to be replaced or it'll have to be reprogrammed using the Zentry system. So that's the problem. When you add electrical devices to your car, where you get the power is really important. I've got a little video camera in the windshield, and I run a wire clear around back to the cigarette socket in the back of the console. It works perfectly, and stuff like that. So, don't cut into any wire in the newer cars. Just don't do it. If you have any questions, call me. I'll tell you, this company, you can go on their website and order whatever you need for your car. And the e-trailer hitches bolt right up. I had no problem with them.
Yeah, I see that Drew Schultz has his hand up. Drew, go ahead and ask your question, please. Drew, you'll have to go ahead and unmute.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yes, just a couple of questions, if that's okay. George, you mentioned the regular non-ethanol gasoline, and ever since this whole shutdown started, so about 2 months ago, I thought, well, let me see if I can find some non-ethanol gas, because if I can't drive that much, I don't want that condensation in the tank to cause mold and stuff from that ethanol. And the one gas station that had some, it was only either 89 or 91, not 93 octane. And I've just always heard we're supposed to put 93 octane, except I think California, they had the 91 version back in the late 80s, early 90s. But what's the deal with that? If I can't find 93 octane non-ethanol gas around here, is it safe to use the lower version?
Check your owner's manual. Mine says 91 octane is minimum for my GLK 350 gasoline engine.
Okay.
But if it says you have to have 91, you can get octane enhancers if you want to add to the. But rather than you doing that, just buy this Stabil product that offsets the bad effects of ethanol. And even though it's, your car may be sitting for a few weeks or not consuming the gasoline at the rate you usually consume it, that protects you pretty well until you can get going again.
Oh, great.
I'm lucky. Just a few blocks from my house, I go to a Sunoco dealer. It's 93 octane real gasoline.
Oh, good. And so I could do the Stabil product, and that would nullify any bad results from the ethanol just perfectly fine, instead of going for the regular version.
Go to the Stabil website, and you can see all their products, and look at the one you want, and print it out and go to your local auto parts store, see if they have it, or to order it.
Sure.
Check around, see who has it.
Well, great. Well, thanks. And then if I might ask one more thing, we mentioned about unplugging the battery. And so in my 87 SEC, I'll do that easily enough. In my 07 CLS, a computer, or CLS, a computer on wheels, like we talked about.
Yeah.
If I need to change like the spark plugs or something like that, or the coil packs, and I unhook the ground wire from the battery in the trunk, will I have to reset the car's computers again, or is it like? Because I've always heard these newer computerized cars that if you unplug the battery, you want the dealership or the independent shop or whoever to do it, because they've got to reset everything. So what's the real deal on that?
Well, I would use a battery tender.
Oh, while I'm doing the work under the hood or whatever?
Sure. Yeah, it keeps the car up, but not off the battery. And handling the coil packs and things like that. Yeah, it's nice to do it. But if you disconnect the battery, you can reset. Check your owner's manual. It tells you how to reset everything.
Okay.
It tells me how to, like a window. push the up button and it goes up, and then you hold it for 3 seconds more. Then let go. Then you run it down, hold the switch for 3 more seconds. That does that window. See, because our power windows have the device that measures the revolutions of the motor. That's how it works. And it doesn't know what revolutions are, but when you hold it 3 seconds, the little module, or the SAM, remembers it. That's how it works. So don't
Okay.
be afraid to disconnect the battery anyway. It tells you how to reset everything. The mechanics make a big deal out of it. It's nothing.
Okay, good. I'm just afraid I won't be able to start the car and then I'll have a problem or something like that.
Your car will start, but go through the owner's manual tells you what things, your sliding roof, all your windows, your steering wheel, all the way left, all the way right.
Hmm.
At the end of travel of each device, hold it for 3 seconds more. It's pretty simple. I've done it. My 99 AMG was that way.
Okay, well, great. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, well, I had told George that we'd go for about 90 minutes, and we're slightly over 90 minutes now. So I think I probably ought to just draw to a close. George, you have any concluding remarks you'd like to say?
Well, I'll answer any other questions anybody has. But
Okay.
the main thing, I want to touch on is taking care of these electronic cars and what you should and should not do with the darn thing, compared to something from the 70s or 80s, which are pretty simple, relatively simple, and beginning to understand the advantages of using these computerized systems, the SAM and the CAN bus, and the way they're all put together, and the logic that can build into it. So it's interesting. Like my GLK, for instance, you can open the back hatch, but if a door is open anywhere, it won't close until you close the door and then either get out and push the button in the hatch or use the switch in the driver's door to close it. So the idea that it doesn't close while somebody's underneath it. They're assuming if the door is open, somebody might be underneath it, so it won't go down. So that's kind of a logic thing. And way back in the 70s and 80s, that would have to be accomplished with a bunch of relays. Now it's accomplished with a solid state device called the SAM, a chip in the SAM. It has all this logic built in. The same with door locks. If I got one door that didn't quite lock, if I walk away and I touch it and it doesn't hear it beep, I said, what happened? I go out, one door didn't quite close when I went to shove it closed. I didn't push it hard enough. So just the logic prevents it trying to lock when one or more doors isn't closed properly. And there's a lot of other logic built into the car. If I leave my headlights on, they'll turn off after a while. If they're in automatic, okay, there's an automatic position. That's another device. So these newer cars, they have a lot of convenience features. It can only be done easy with microprocessors in the SAMs and the CAN bus, where older cars, you had to do a lot more careful. So there's good and bad about them all. And just main thing is take care of the car. The electric system is probably the most important. Degraded electric is really a problem. But on the other hand, I'm available for questions as long as anybody wants to hang on.
Yeah, I see another question in chat, and this will be an interesting one. Are the electrical problems subject just to Mercedes or all new cars?
Well, all cars. Oh, you should see the BMW list. Oh my Lord, those guys, they have problems too. And Audi. My son, engine calibrator, and they did some work on the Audis, and they'd get their prototype in, and it wouldn't work. They have to give it back to Audi. Says, give us a prototype that works, because his crew, they'll take a car that's to be calibrated. First, they go up to northern Manitoba in wintertime, and they let it cold soak at sub-zero weather. And it's got to start and operate without exceeding emission requirements. Same for Death Valley. They go to Death Valley and take these cars, and they pull a weighted trailer up a long hill out of Death Valley on a hot day. They get to the top, they let it sit there in a hot soak for a while, and measure the emissions, and it better meet emissions. If it doesn't, they got to go back. Now the cars that they do this in, they've got a laptop that's plugged into everything, and they're actually writing the engine program by setting up all these parameters, because you can't sell a car in this country unless it meets the EPA, and that is done by engine calibration. That's what my son does. But he has all these stories of cars, not just Audi, but other cars. Now, his company doesn't do Mercedes Benz, but I'm sure all cars have suffered some problems, one or the other, with electronics, and it's just part of the thing. Just like your computer. I mean, you buy a desktop, a year later it starts to act up. What do? You know, I unplugged mine. And wait a few minutes, plug it in again. It works.
Yeah, we have a chat question popped in. Why did Mercedes have biodegradable wiring harness?
The story I got was back in the late 80s, 90s, the politics there, the Green Party was lobbying manufacturers to make their products more recyclable, you know, and wiring insulation was thought to be, well, it was plastic or a form of plastic and rubber, you know, and not easily recyclable. So Bosch, Mercedes got together, and yeah, we make wires with insulation that when the car is retired, the wiring can be recycled. The insulation isn't a problem. It just falls off the wiring. Well, got it in the States here, it fell off the wiring a little too soon. So I think in Europe too, they have to retire a car after so long, so many miles or so many years, unless they get a special permit and they can only drive it, you know, a certain time. I'm not quite sure what all that is. My son knows about it. He worked over there for several years. But anyway, yeah, they used it because they had to. It was a law for a while. Just like we have emission controls because it's the law from EPA. But unelected bureaucrats setting the standards.
Okay, well, I've got a question in chat from Mary Ann. It says, have you tried installing a kill switch to allow the battery to remain in the vehicle unused? And someone else asked, do you get a charge out of all the battery questions?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, you can get a disconnect switch. They're commonly available. Race cars have them. Just a knob you turn, you know. If you want to, finding the room and the right bolt size to put it on the battery is the only problem. But and you got to get to the battery. In my case, I got to remove the heater plenum, and then I can get to the battery. You know, or the little one in the trunk, I got to take out all the trunk coverings and pull off this cover, which is impossible to get back on. And there's the battery. So that kind of a disconnect, you know, I don't know if it's worth it trying to disconnect everything or take apart all the panels on the car to reach the battery. And some of the MLs, but the battery's under the floor, under one of the seats, I think, under the floor or something. But God. So to do that, you know, disconnect the battery that way, I don't know. Of course, you got to get into it anyway to disconnect the negative cable too, so it doesn't matter. But the kill switch, I've seen that they're right on the battery. Race cars, you see a knob on a race car. They got that.
Okay, well, I think we've run through the chat questions, and I don't see any hands up. So
Okay.
final chance for questions. Raise your hand or chat something if you have another question. And I don't see them popping in.
If you want to send it in or call it, my email was on the last slide there. And it's also in the Star Magazine on my ad. So for performance analysis.
Okay.
A really old car, we make parts for them. But
Well, George, thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate it. It's been a great exchange of information. One of the chat comments was maybe we should do this every month, so we'll have to see about that. Let me do a little commercial for our follow-on events. We have a TSD Rally School by video teleconference next week, May 9th, with a training rally in between, and then a follow-up on May 17th. We have a photography seminar on the 20th of June, which we intend to have a virtual presence on as well as in person, a concourse judging school on the 27th of June, and a small number of cars show at Halcyon near Atlanta. We'll probably do some type of video recording or broadcast of that as well. And just to mention, for those of you who like karting and live within a few miles of center of Georgia, we're going to have 1st of August karting at Lanier Raceplex. It'll just be our group together on the track, which will be a lot of fun. They've got great karts. And another little commercial for us, go like our Facebook page MBCA Peachtree so you can see what we're up to. And if there's anything else you'd like to join up with, we'd love to have you. Thank you for all the participants. Again, thank you to George for doing this for us. We're going to be sending out an email that asks you to fill out a survey, because we always like to see if we're happy, see if you're happy and what we can do to improve our performance. So please take that survey. And thank you all for being a part of this. And thank you, George, for doing it.
Okay, if anybody has interest, I have a whole bunch of other presentations for some of the older cars. The climate control, cruise control, stuff like that. We're having such a big crowd. There's not that many people that have these older cars, but also just care and feeding of the car mechanically, the things that you can expect to wear out as time goes by. So that's another possibility, Gary, and we can talk about that. So can I go to your website, Gary, and sign up for the newsletter? I'd like to get your newsletter, your Peachtree newsletter.
Sure, we can add you to our email address. I'm sure Diana and Doug there will make that happen. We'd love to do that.
Keep track of what's going on. I might even come down and participate.
Yeah, come see us, and I'll contact you about doing some more of those presentations, because I think this has been very popular, and people, there's, from our last survey from our event 2 weeks ago, it was very clear that there's a big appetite for technical discussions. And I know you have about 4 or 5 other prepared presentations that everyone's going to be interested in. So I think we probably ought to do this again.
Yeah, I've had a lot of experience in some of these older cars, the 107 SLs, 123 diesels and gasoline, 124s and 126s, some of those cars. And I'll be glad to do one on that. We can figure it out. I'll put a lot of stuff on the slides I've already got, so I just have to put it together. So it can be done. Glad to do it. So again, I'm available by email or phone. If anybody wants to reach me with any specific questions or problems, I'll see what I can do for you.